This is the new Sony ULT Field 3 Bluetooth speaker, and it's a very solid offering, but there's a catch. What's up, internet? I'm Brian McDuff, aka BMac, and welcome to another video. So yes indeed, today I do have with me here the Sony ULT Field 3 Bluetooth speaker, the almost baby of the ULT Power Sound lineup, a new portable speaker in that lineup that sits just above the actual baby, the Field 1, and the newly introduced Field 5. But with the Field 3 being one of the baby speakers of the ULT lineup, can it actually hold its own, and what if there's a catch? That's what we're going to discuss. But first things first, I do need to give a huge thank you and shout out to Sony for actually sending out an ULT Field 3 for me to be able to check out, use, and enjoy. So Sony, thank you. I appreciate you. But with that having been said, let's break this baby down, starting things out with the design of the Sony ULT Field 3 and what makes this little guy unique in its physical makeup. The ULT Field 3 is about half the size of a loaf of bread, and it weighs in at just over 2.5 pounds. The inside is composed of a tweeter and a woofer with two passive radiators here on the sides to enhance bass performance that we'll be talking about a little bit later on. And on the outside, it's got a solid, rugged feel with this mesh fabric covering that goes all around the outside of the speaker itself with some matte plastic accents wherever that mesh fabric material isn't covering. On the top, you do get some dedicated buttons. You're gonna be getting a power button, a Party Connect button, a multi-function track control button, volume buttons, and of course your ULT button for toggling into the ULT mode. On the back, you do get a sealed off compartment, which is gonna house the USB-C DC in and out port, as well as a battery and battery care button. You do also get a carrying strap included with the Field 3, which hooks very nicely into these little hideaway loops that are exposed when you turn over these little tab covers on the top. Awesome design there, nice little subtlety. And all of this is gonna be packaged up with an IP66 and IP67 dust and water resistance rating, giving you full dust protection and even full water protection with submersion protection up to 1 meter deep for up to 30 minutes. And then last but certainly not least, the Field 3 is available in 3 different colors, those colors being black, off-white, and forest gray, all of which I think look pretty nice and premium. However, I do have to admit here that the forest gray color does look a lot more gray than it does a foresty green color like it shows in the stock photo. Not something I personally care about. I think it's an awesome color, but if you wanted it to be a little bit more green, it's definitely a lot more gray than it is green. But now we have to talk about the speaker's connectivity capabilities and how you could use this Field 3 in your daily life with your audio setup. The ULT Field 3 supports Bluetooth 5.2 for some of the latest Bluetooth technology, and I know that this speaker is just one step above the entry-level ULT Power Sound speaker in the overall lineup, but I was still holding out hope here for some LDAC audio codec support, considering its price point. But you do still have the ability of connecting to 2 different devices simultaneously with the Field 3, which is awesome for if you're with a friend and you both want to connect and take turns DJing, for example, without having to manually connect or disconnect either phone each time. And we do actually have included here with the Field 3 a feature that you see in some other Sony ULT Power Sound speakers, that being Sony Sound Field Optimization. SFO is basically a technology whereby there's a microphone system built into the Field 3 where it will be utilized to actually listen to itself and the ambient noises around you while you're listening to music to adjust the sound balance and optimize sound output on the fly, theoretically making it sound the best that it can. Just like with the other ULT Power Sound speakers, I haven't really noticed a difference with this on or off, but I trust it enough to leave it on, and I just leave it on, and I guess it's doing its job. You do also have the ability of connecting the Field 3 to the Sony Companion app, which is now a new Sony Companion app, this being the Sony Sound Connect app, which is now gonna combine all the different kind of separate apps you had before into one. It's available for iOS and Android, and as it relates to the Field 3, this is really going to apply to the different kind of speaker settings you get set on it, as well as the DJ controls. There are no party light controls here because there's no party lights built into the Field 3, but it's nice now that we have one cohesive app with everything put together, rather than having to go into all the separate apps like we had to do before. Within the Sony Sound Connect app is also, of course, where you can update the firmware of the Field 3 speaker and even set your own 10-band EQ preset, but you may end up not wanting to even do that because, like I said earlier, there is an ULT mode built in which we'll talk about in just a second. Another somewhat surprising feature that you have here with the Field 3 is the Sony Party Connect feature. This is gonna give the ability of actually connecting the Field 3 to up to 100 different Party Connect compatible speakers at once, all synced together, all playing the same music, which is really a cool experience. It's especially helpful for if you already have other Sony ULT speakers and you didn't want to have to sacrifice one for the other, so you can just basically use them all at the same time without having to decide between them. I think it's a really cool feature that allows you to kind of pick and choose different ULT Power Sound speakers and use them together. But one feature I was actually pretty surprised to see included on the Field 3, but not the older brother, the Field 5, was actually a built-in microphone system that you could use to take phone calls or even interact with your connected device's voice assistant. And I think this is actually a lot more helpful than people might realize. If you are by the poolside, for example, and you don't want to have to go to your connected device and change a playlist or play a certain song, you could do so just at the touch of a button with that track control button, that multifunction track control button here on the Field 3, which is gonna connect you to your voice assistant, allowing you to play pretty much any music you want to. Something you do not have the option of, like I said, on the Field 5. But speaking of listening to music, how does the Sony ULT Field 3 actually sound? What's the sound quality like on this little guy, and how does it compare? First things first, I just wanna say that the Field 3 actually sounded better and got a lot louder than I ever expected it to, but that was when listening with the ULT mode turned on and at more moderate volumes. When I moved into a larger room with the Field 3 and really started to crank up the volume on this puppy, really put it to the test, that's when things did start to fall apart a little bit. Like its older brother, the Field 5, the Field 3 does offer the same power consumption rating of around 27 watts, which one could assume means that the actual sound output wattage is slightly below that, which definitely puts this speaker at the lower end of power output capability at its price point. And why this is important outside of it just being a tech spec is because it's leaving less headroom for the speaker at those lower power output ratings, which is gonna lead to less expansive sound, with potentially more distortion and more compression at louder volumes. I don't really have a concern regarding distortion. I did not perceive distortion even at those louder volumes, but the compression, I definitely started to notice past, say, 65 or 70% volume. It's still got some solid sound quality potential, but I think you need to reshape your mind frame around what the speaker is for. If you plan on using it for more intimate, smaller listening environments and scenarios, that's where you're probably gonna enjoy the sound quality. But it is not gonna be for scenarios where you're trying to bring the house down and crank this thing up to the max, expecting massive party speaker sound that sounds amazing. It's just not gonna deliver that for you. But next up, let's tackle how long you could actually expect the Field 3 to last for, and what the battery life is like, and how long you could expect to be able to listen to it. Sony is promising up to 24 hours of battery life on a single charge with the Field 3, but those 24 hours of battery life are gonna be when listening with an ULT mode on and the volume set to only around 44%. If you're listening to the Field 3 at a much higher volume, say around 75%, that's when you could probably expect only around 15 hours of battery life, with upwards of only around 5 hours of battery life if you're listening with ULT mode on and full volume. Those are numbers I'm actually pretty happy with the Field 3. Yes, you have a pretty substantial drop off from the advertised 24 hours of battery life when you listen at those louder volumes, but even 5 to 6 hours of battery life when you're listening at 100% volume with ULT mode turned on is pretty commendable. So I'm happy with the battery life. It is also worth mentioning, like we talked about earlier in this review, that you do have a battery care mode built into the Field 3, which is whereby the maximum battery capacity is going to be capped at 90%, which is going to help you with long-term battery health, which might be a good idea to use if you plan on using this speaker a lot throughout the next coming years. And when it comes time to charge up the Field 3, you are gonna do that once again on the back here with the USB-C port, which is serving as a DC in and a DC out port. It's gonna take around 3.5 hours to fully charge the Field 3 from 0 to 100% if you're charging at its potential 27 watts of power delivery input, with a quick charging capability here actually providing up to 2 hours of audio playback at 44% volume on just a quick 10-minute charge. You do also have the ability of using that USB-C port as a DC out port, thereby using the Field 3 basically as a power bank for a connected device. Helpful feature if you absolutely need to do so to keep the party going. But with all that having been said, here are my final thoughts on the Sony ULT Field 3 Bluetooth speaker and whether or not this little guy is worth picking up. At the end of the day, the ULT Field 3 serves as a fantastic bridge speaker between what was before the smaller ULT Field 1 and the much larger, much more expensive ULT Field 7 speaker, with it offering a lot of the same sound quality and power that the older brother, the ULT Field 5 offers, but in a smaller package and at a smaller price point. The size is great, the portability is helpful, and even the sound quality itself is solid when you're listening at those more moderate volumes. The bottom line here is that if you plan on getting the Field 3 so that you could blast it at 100% and get the loudest, biggest sound out of it while maintaining the best possible sound quality, The catch is that it's not gonna deliver that. It really isn't meant for those kind of listening scenarios, or at least it won't sound as impressive at those louder volumes that you otherwise might hope it would. But if you plan on getting the Field 3 as a speaker for your smaller to medium-sized gatherings, or for just your more intimate listening sessions, that's when you probably are gonna like what the Field 3 offers with its sound quality, even considering its price point. As always, for the latest deals, prices, promos, and information for the ULT Field 3, you can of course always head to my affiliate link, bmac.link/field3, or of course, as always, there will be clickable links in the video description box and in the comment section below, so check those out. In the meantime, it is time for me to go get my workout in. I'm gonna use the Field 3 to pump the pump. I will see you guys in my next video.